We're going to be in Genesis 25. If you want to put up your Bible or grab one from the back, Genesis 25. We're going to continue on again in the narrative of Genesis that Mike continued for us last week. Grateful for him and him filling in for me while I was out of town. He did a great job, I hear. Yes. And he ripped off that Band-Aid, got past the nerves of being in front of a crowd of people. Good for him. He's going to fill in again in a couple of weeks when I'm in Africa with the team. So you'll get to hear from Mike again, which we're thrilled about. If you don't know Mike, you need to get to know Mike. He's a great guy. So we're going to look at one particular chapter here in Genesis 25, and we're going to pull a few main ideas out of it. We're going to learn of Abraham's death and the lineages that come from him, and we'll see some connections that come with all that. Then we'll fast forward up to the book of Hebrews for just a minute at the end, because sometimes we can forget that Isaac wasn't Abraham's only son. And there are issues that come with that. Those different lines come into play later on in history. The tribes that will eventually inhabit the Arabian Peninsula and the conflict that began then, still going on to even this day. So Genesis 25, let's do 7 through 11. These are the days of the years of Abraham's life that he lived, 175 years. And Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of days, and he was gathered to his people. Then his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, facing Mamre, the field which Abraham bought from the sons of Heth. There Abraham was buried with Sarah his wife. Now it happened after the death of Abraham, God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac lived by Beer Lahai Roi. So Abraham and Sarah reunited in the same tomb, with Abraham living to be 175, old and full of days. You know, what a great description of someone at their death. We all want to be so blessed to die that way. As the passage continues, ending in verse 18, tells us that Ishmael died at the age of 137, and his descendants dispersed into different areas. Verse 11 told us where Isaac lives, Beer Lahai Roi. Does that name sound familiar to anyone who's been paying attention as we've read through the book of Genesis? Because we've read of that place before. After Isaac is born, and it's not going well with Hagar, Ishmael's mom, because Ishmael's mocking Isaac, and Sarah throws a hissy fit and tells Abraham to kick them out, blames him for all that happened, even though it was her idea. And you need to kick them out. So Hagar flees to a well where the Lord rescues her, saves them from death. And she names it the well of the living one who sees me. So isn't it interesting that it's Isaac who lives where Hagar and Ishmael had been banished to, where God saves them, and now it's the home of Isaac. Let's go back to the text 25. We'll start in verse 19. Now these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean, of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramean, to be his wife. And Isaac entreated Yahweh on behalf of his wife because she was barren, and Yahweh was moved by his entreaty. So Rebekah, his wife, conceived. But the children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is so, then why am I this way?" So she went to inquire of Yahweh. And Yahweh said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples will be separated from your body. And one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. And her days to give birth were fulfilled, and behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came forth red, all over like a hairy garment, and they named him Esau. Afterward, his brother came forth with his hand holding on to Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to them. And the boys grew up. Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a peaceful man living in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he had an appetite for hunted game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So let's do what we do. Let's ask some questions of the text and get a feel for all that's going on and how all the pieces fit together. What do we learn about Rebekah's condition in the passage? What is she dealing with? She's barren. She cannot have children, which you're going to see some links between Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah. There's some connections there for sure. And how does Isaac respond to her inability to have children? He prays. Yeah, he goes to the Lord. He knows he's powerless over this. He's not in charge of who can give birth and who can't give birth. So he goes to the Lord and asks, why would he do that? He knows the promise. He knows the promise given to Eve that someone will come from your line, the seed will come. The promise given to Abraham that I'm going to birth all these nations through you, and kings are going to come from you, and you're not going to be able to count your descendants because you can't count the stars in the sky or the sand on the seashore. Well, Abraham and Sarah don't have kids for a long, long, long time, and now the next in line, the child of the promise, Isaac, well, they can't have children. So he knows God's got to do something here to fulfill his promises. Isaac is 40 when he marries Rebekah. His sons are born when he's 60. So 20 years after the request, God grants it. Again, be reminded, as we have been with Abraham, God doesn't care about your timeline. He only cares about his timeline, and he's willing to play the long game. Now remember, the promise that God makes to Abraham in Genesis 12 isn't ultimately fulfilled until Christ comes. Paul in Galatians will look back and say, yeah, that seed, that's Christ, singular, that's him. God makes a promise and fulfills it 4,000 years later. He does not care at all about your timeline. He doesn't care at all about your plans, even you being born and dying without ever seeing the fulfillment of his promises. He's willing to make a promise and wait for millennia to fulfill it, because that's what he does. It's what happens when you're dealing with an eternal God. Time is irrelevant to him. So God will play the long game 20 years out, which it's 25 years for Abraham before the child is born. Certainly in light of the 4,000 years, 20 years is the blink of an eye. But how many of you want to pray and God will say, oh yeah, sure, and then 20 years later he delivers? That's a life of frustration. Nobody wants to deal with that. That's what they deal with. And then Rebekah goes to pray to God. Why? She wants to have a baby, but she's pregnant. And what's going on with the babies? They're fighting in the womb. Siblings will be siblings even in utero. They're going to fight. Brothers will be brothers. So they're struggling with one another. She doesn't know what's going on. Again, she can't go and get an ultrasound and find out that, there's twins. She can't do that. So there's turmoil in her womb, which is pointing us there's going to be turmoil when they come out of the womb. And there certainly is, as we will walk through our story together. And God answers in poetic form in verse 23. Most of your Bibles will see a difference in even the typeface of how it's shown in the text. She prays, asks God, and God himself responds. There are two babies, two nations, two people groups are fighting in your womb. They're going to be separated from there. So not only are the descendants going to be as numerous as the stars in the sky, it's now two different people groups who are going to continue to multiply and expand. And God makes some declarations about them. They're going to be divided from one another, separated. and one's going to be stronger than the other, and the older is going to serve the younger. Not going to go well. That's going to cause some fights when that happens. And we've got some issues with the rights of the firstborn. We'll talk about that in a second. And God reverses that. The name of the firstborn son is Esau. This is what's great. Esau means hairy, because he's born hairy. Doesn't it strike you as maybe mildly cruel to name your child that? Oh, he's hairy, thus he shall be named Sasquatch. So he comes out hairy. What are we going to call him? Call him Harry. Works out well. Almost, it's almost like he's wearing a cloak. You're hairy when you take off your shirt and they don't know that you took off your shirt. That's a level of hair that I don't want to become familiar with. The second son to be born is Jacob. Now, Jacob means deceiver or supplanter. It could be translated that way, the one who takes the place of. So there is some significance and imagery of him grabbing onto the heel. So that could be pointing towards he's that supplanter. He's trying to trip his brother because he's going to take the lead once he gets him out of the way. Or it could be that's where the phrase pulling your leg comes from. He's a deceiver. He's a liar, just pulling your leg. So this is what Jacob is doing. So they see this and they name him Sasquatch and Liar are the names of their children. Again, Bible people I shake my head at most of the time. What do we learn about the boys as they grow up? What does Esau do? What does he like to do? He hunts. He's an outdoorsman. He goes out and how then does that affect his relationship with his parents? He's gone a lot. Dad loves him. They're playing favorites. This won't be the first time we see parents playing favorites. It never works out well. We'll see it really put on display when we get to the end of Genesis with Joseph. And parents playing favorites, never a good thing. So dad loves Esau because dad likes wild game. And Esau's the one that goes to get him that game. What do we learn about Jacob, though? What's he doing? He's hanging out at home. He's peaceable. He's not violent. Doesn't like to hunt. Hangs out with mom. Apparently, he's a really good cook. We'll learn that in a bit with the lentil stew and all of it. So they're very different. And Rebekah favors Jacob. So you've got dad's favorite, mom's favorite, and you've got this setup now for problems. That already God has spoken. They're going to be divided, and they're going to fight. Older's going to serve the younger. There's going to be some problems there. But then the text ends with the showing that mom and dad are showing favoritism. And that's going to be bad as well. So again, there's some parallels here between Abraham and Sarah. They know the seed's been promised, but they go through a period of barrenness where they can't become pregnant. So God steps in and delivers and does what he does. Again, their names are very fitting as we walk through it. The whole claim to the birthright, the claim to inherit the estate, the majority of the father's goods and land, with the older serving the younger. This is going to be a problem. So the firstborn son typically gets, according to Deuteronomy 21, the firstborn male heir gets a double portion of the inheritance. So it's 2/3 and a third, essentially what's happening. So just from sheer fact of being born first, they get the wealth, the primary role of it. They also get to take on the role of family patriarch when dad dies. So they get the money and the power of the household. Now, remember with them, households aren't mom and dad, 2 kids, and a dog. We're talking hundreds of people in their household. Almost like this little army. Remember, Abraham had the army of over 300 men that went out and rescued Lot. So it's a lot of money and a lot of power. So it's a privilege to be the firstborn, which Esau has. the firstborn son. He has that birthright. So his future is set, a lot of wealth, a lot of power. He's going to be the one in charge. He's the next one in line. You take away the spiritual side of it, he's the next one in line as the firstborn son to take the lineage of the promises from God from generation to generation. Then there's some problems. Verse 29. And Jacob had cooked stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. Then Esau said to Jacob, please give me a swallow from the red stuff, this red stuff, for I am famished. Therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, first, sell me your birthright. And Esau said, behold, I'm about to die. So of what use then is the birthright to me? And Jacob said, first swear to me. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. So Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went away. Thus Esau despised his birthright. That must have been some really good smelling stew. Again, a life of wealth and power. The next in line for the promises of God for his people in the world. He's hungry, and he gives it all up for a bowl of soup. If you have kids in children's ministry, they're eating lentil stew today. My wife made it. I woke up to the house smelling of lentil stew that had cooked all night. It smells delicious. I hope there's leftovers for us to have for lunch. So it's red. So he's called Edom. So he gets a nickname, which even goes back to when he's born, he looks red. He's got all this hair on him. So he's a red Sasquatch, the rare red Sasquatch, not the normal brown ones. And he becomes Edom. Edom means red stew. So he becomes the father of the Edomites. And the Edomites are an enemy to Israel. And eventually will get destroyed for their lack of help that they refused to offer Israel after the Exodus. So some time has passed by the time we get to these verses. The boys have grown up. And again, we've already learned about the boys. Esau's out hunting. Jacob's at home cooking. That's happening here again as well. Give me the stew. Sell me your birthright. So Jacob takes full advantage of the opportunity. He's dirty. He's devious. We don't like Jacob because, who would do this? Yeah, I'll give you a bowl of soup if you will give me this. Just an unbelievably unequal, stupid offer for him to make. And Esau apparently doesn't care. Sure, I'm about to die. Well, you big baby, you're not. I'm about to die. What good is the birthright to me? I'm going to starve to death anyway, so that he swears an oath. And what does the text say about Esau's attitude towards wealth, power, his father's blessing, and being the child of promise, the one God works through in the world? He despises it. Tells you everything you need to know about Esau. It's not really the stew. He hates everything that God has done. He doesn't care at all what God would do in him and through him. And before we go to Hebrews 12, don't you just want to show up somehow, take a time machine if we could, and go into this tent and sit down with Esau? Go, bro, what are you doing? Calm down. You're not going to die. We'll get you some food. You just want to put your arm around him and go, there's a day coming, Esau. For centuries from this point on, when God reveals himself to the future patriarchs of his people, do you know how God's going to describe himself to them? He's going to say to them, I am the God of Abraham and Isaac and Esau. Won't that be great? You're in that line, Esau. And when God for centuries talks about himself, he will talk about you because you are the first of the big three in this heritage of God's work in the world. The God of Abraham and Isaac and Esau. There is not a single time where God ever says that phrase because of this event right here. It will now forever be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because Esau made a choice that ruined his future and the future of the nation that would come from his line. This is the danger, and this is the lesson that we learn. This is the danger of making a decision for immediate gratification to the sacrifice of long-term health and blessing. This is the American way. We will sacrifice long-term blessing, heritage from the Lord, all that God has promised. We'll do it for this moment right here and whatever pleasure I want that's in front of my face. That's been happening since the dawn of time. Adam and Eve did it with fruit on a tree. Esau does it with a bowl of soup and sacrifices everything that has cataclysmic consequences for him, his family, and everyone who will come from his line. Your sin, where you would sacrifice long-term blessing for immediate gratification, has cataclysmic consequences for you, for your family, and all who will come from your line for generations to come. This matters, doesn't it? Turn to Hebrews chapter 12. The author of Hebrews looks back and points to this moment as an example of what not to do that helps us see what God wants us to do. Verse 15 of Hebrews 12. Let's just start with verse 14. Pursue peace with all men and the sanctification, which is the process of becoming holy, without which no one will see the Lord. Seeing to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and by it many be defiled. And also that there be no sexually immoral or godless person like Esau, who sold his own birthright for a single meal. For you know that even afterwards, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought for it with tears. So that comes later when Isaac is dying, gives that blessing onto the firstborn. Jacob will deceive yet again to go in and get the blessing. We'll talk about that in the weeks to come. And he has to dress up, because remember his brother's a Sasquatch, so he has to dress up and go in and pretend to be his brother so that his dad will pronounce this blessing on him. And then Esau comes in for that blessing, and it is too late. And though he will cry about it, the consequences of his decision are in stone. And he will forever go in a different line now. So from that place of bitterness, from that place of foolish decision-making, the Edomites will flourish and prosper. Numbers chapter 20, Israel is on their way through the wilderness from Egypt after coming out of slavery after 400 years, and they're on their way to the promised land, and they ask for safe passage from the Edomites, their family, their relatives. And Edom denies it, and later on, Israel goes back and destroys all of them for refusing to grant them safe passage. When God makes a promise, we have to believe it. No matter whatever is going to be in the way, barrenness, like that seems to be a pretty big barrier between what God has promised of a nation to come with no children. God can overcome any barrier after he's made a promise. And now this promise God gives of the birthright to the firstborn goes now to Jacob, not to Esau, and everything from that point on will move forward in a way that from a human standpoint it shouldn't have. Now, God knew this was coming. That's why he told them. This is what the older is going to serve the younger. God set all this stuff up. This is who I'm going to work through. This is how it's going to happen. God's got this from eternity past to eternity future. He's in charge, orchestrating all of it. Even to say, that set of twins that are going to come, they're going to fight, this one's going to be a deceiver, and I'm then going to work through that one very much on purpose, showing us God uses wicked, deceitful people, even like Jacob. Which ought to give you a whole lot of hope. That if he'll do that with him, he'll do that with us. God is gracious and kind and uses people he shouldn't, but he does. How wonderful it is that he would do such a great thing. So you've got some homework there to walk through the text a little bit and just thinking through how to apply. This is the decision that Esau made. This is the foolishness of it from Hebrews. How then do I still see that reality in my life right now today, that I would sacrifice long-term blessing, long-term prosperity for the sake of immediate gratification right now? This is the world in which we live. We live in the greatest nation in the history of the world, the most prosperous nation in the history of the world. Therefore, our temptations to do what Esau did are greater than anything Esau ever knew. You can sit in your bed with the Amazon app on your phone and do exactly this very thing. Anytime you want, 24 hours a day, and in 24 to 48 hours, it'll be on your doorstep. I can't wait for the drones to get it to me in a couple of hours. It's coming. We're looking forward to that day. That's what we're talking about. I will sacrifice long-term blessing and prosperity for short-term gain. Always a foolish decision. So enjoy walking through that. I hope it's helpful as you process and apply that. And we'll pick up the story next Sunday. 1, 2, 3, go team.